there. So this work, this one, and this one, I'm going to go through them again. They're all kind of under the umbrella of Postcards from Home or Untitled Scenic 1 and 2. These pieces, I shot them in the summer of 2020. These are stills, but there are videos. If you haven't seen the show, they're shown on like 3x4 old CRT monitors. And I find that technology really interesting. I find technology that we're losing touch with really interesting. I know it was like both difficult for Lucas and I, who champions getting these works up and running, and just a disconnect between the technology we're working with now and things in the past, and having to connect those things in order to keep working, keep moving, and for this work to actually make it into the show. So thank you, Lucas, for all of your help with this, and everybody at Struts. Thank you guys so much for all of that. Right, so Postcards from Home. For me, when I shot these pieces, I was thinking a lot about like the Caribbean as an ideal place where people, they go to vacation, they stay in their hotels, they probably eat some subpar food, and they go to relax. But I feel like for the rest of the world, the Caribbean isn't necessarily a place where people live regular lives and go through all of life stages and conduct business. I think it's very much still thought of on a global stage as an escape from reality. And I kind of wanted to echo that escape from reality a little bit in these works, while also still talking about the danger and the harm that this can bring to local populations and communities, and leaves economies entirely dependent on tourism. I had looked at a lot of older posters for tourism, like both on like eBay and Pinterest and anywhere I could find them in catalogs, posters that similar imagery, probably taken in some of the same places. I did find a lot from Barbados. They would center usually white upper middle class families roaming around the island with Black people or servants attending to their needs. And I feel like this idea of the Caribbean is still very much ingrained in the way that we think about the region as a whole. And I think a lot of people are working really hard to step away from that and to bring us into a new space and a new light. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been living in Canada for the better part of 8 years. I've spent most of my adult life here, but I definitely like grew up in Barbados. That's my base and that's my frame of reference for a lot of the work I make. So food is something that's really important to me. I think about food all of the time. And when I moved here, I think one of my biggest fears was not being able to eat or enjoy things that I was used to, or fresh fruit or fish, and how those things would come to impact my life. So I think extensively about planting. I think about it day and night sometimes. I research it in all of its forms. I'm like, I should be a food scientist, not an artist at this point. So when I first got here, the supermarket was a really important place for me. I was awestruck by how large and expansive, and I used to say impressive they were. I don't feel that way entirely so much anymore. And how a supermarket is so representative to me of the demographic of people living in a particular area and what you can get and not get. I was able to garner a lot of information about the population of Guelph, Waterloo, Kitchener, or even specific areas within those cities, just based on what was in a local Walmart in one part of town and what was in another. And yeah, the things they were restocking. The supermarket is my first point of research, usually for my newer work and a lot of my older work that I was making back in school. I always found myself when I was stuck on how to progress or move forward with something in the supermarket in the middle of the night, just kind of staring and observing and examining things in the aisles and what people were buying, kind of nosy in that way, I guess, like looking in other people's carts, like thinking about their like socio-cultural backgrounds and the things they were making and why they were making them, and if they could get the ingredients they needed for their recipes. So the whole point of that is to say that I was really upset when I couldn't find plantain in certain supermarkets, and it got me thinking a lot about why. Like, I'd look around and I'd see communities present that were likely to eat plantain. I was wanting it, but couldn't find it. And when I could find it, it was green in nature. This further frustrated me because I really couldn't understand why they were picking them so early and that they never ripened the way that they should. They weren't sweet, they were hard, the texture was off, something is just amiss. So I began a little document on Walmart and how I could end up in the produce section and speak to somebody who like does the ordering. And then that led me further afield to realize that it's the distributors that I need to now be in contact with and find out, like, is it like a preservation thing? Like, why are they being picked so early? It's a question I never exactly got to the bottom of, and it's still left unanswered for me personally. And I hope to one day be able to reconcile these issues I have with plantain in the supermarkets here and be able to figure that out in my practice. Plantain, again, important to me. A couple of years ago, this text by called Frying Plantain by Zalika Benta-Reed was really informative and grounding in my thinking about food within my practice. And it really helped me contextualize a lot of my thoughts earlier on. It's about a young girl of Jamaican heritage growing up in Toronto and what it meant to be in this space of in-betweenness, to kind of not be one thing or the other, but a combination of both, which she talks extensively about when she gets to go to Jamaica for the summer, but feel different to her cousins who had lived there, but feel different to the people who'd grown up in Toronto, and how all of these experiences intersected with the food that she was eating. Like, my mind was like blown away with the research and the stuff that this author did. My last solo exhibition, The Chicken is Just Dead First. The title actually came from this text as well. It's a really great moment where she's in Jamaica for the summer playing with her cousins, and one of them is like going to help her aunt get ready for dinner. So she just grabs a chicken out the yard and like snaps the chicken's neck. And that's that. The protagonist freaks out and all her cousins are laughing at her. And she gathers herself up and then is like, we have chickens in Toronto too. They're just dead first. And that has stuck with me ever all these years, ever since the book came out, because it was really interesting to me, the disconnect that we have with food in certain places, like where it comes from, food in its original form. I also think a lot about meat. Apologies to the vegetarians. So yeah, I'm really interested in produce and food as kind of an integral part of my practice. Something really nice that I thought summed up some of both like my work and the text is when they were sitting down for Christmas dinner, and the protagonist, she says about her granny, she starts shaving off portions of the turkey, like digging out some stuffing with a fork. There's 3 spoonfuls there, 4 forkfuls here. She adds rice and peas to my plate, the 2 pieces of ham with baked pineapple, and then the 4 slices of plantain lets me know this plate is for me. See where like I'm getting with the plantain? And I was just like, yes, this is it. And it got me thinking a lot of, again, about fusion, the fusion of cultures and identities, and how those things can manifest themselves in your kitchen and on a plate and with the foods that you're eating, and how one can kind of almost seamlessly integrate into each other or not. I don't know who's got a chance to see Fragments of Epic Memory at the AGO. It was an incredible exhibition that I only got to see photos of from dear friends who literally took photos of everything in the exhibition and all of the text. And I honestly thought like the timing of the show and everything that is happening in the Caribbean and the work that a lot of people are making couldn't have been more timely. I thought that Epics of Fragment Memory really like brought together Caribbean communities and things people were thinking about and the work people were making, often on the margins of various different groups. Again, got me thinking a lot about the idea of hybridity and diasporic betweenness, what it means to, again, not be one thing or the other, but completely in between those things. So how does this all relate back to the plantain? The plantain, again, like just ingrained in my brain. So I was thinking about hybridity and how Caribbean people can kind of make a home anywhere and adaptability of recipes and things you enjoy making and eating, and the idea that what's on your plate or your palate will adapt when you can't always get the things you want. I was gonna like mention all the when I go home to Barbados, all the things I bring back and forth. Then I was like, you know, this like is going on YouTube, so I may or may not, when I travel home, bring back and forth lots of various food things that I enjoy eating, which really shouldn't be a problem in the first place. If I need this specific cheese, I need this specific cheese for a recipe. Anyway, we'll just like cut that part out. So if you're not familiar with plantain, this is it. It's like the cousin of the banana, and you fry it or bake it or boil it or have plantain chips. You need oil of any kind. I'd recommend an unflavored one, and slice them any way you would like, although people recommend on an angle. I just cut mine in circles, and you fry it and you turn it until they're golden. Just maybe not like the fact you needed, but the fact I wanted to give: how to fry plantain properly. All right, so this piece in the show is called How to Make Sweetbread with Gran. In it, my granny is teaching me how to make sweetbread. Or you can call it coconut bread. Some people call it that too. It's like a traditional Barbadian dish. Also, I don't think she looks up at the camera the whole time throughout this work. I don't know if she remembered it was there. She really was in the moment just teaching me how to make this dish. If you've seen the work, you know that I'm probably goofing around a bit, like getting back into like childhood mode, like with my granny, eating the dough, causing a mockery of the whole thing, probably behind the scenes. In front of me is a scale. So I still don't have a written version of this recipe. Like I wanted to honor the fact that this has been something that's been passed down orally to her. It's not written down anywhere. I couldn't recite it off to you now. And even when she was teaching me to make it, I found it was so difficult even to translate how to measure flour on a scale with the measuring cup system. Like, I don't know if that's like telling of my generation. I don't know how to whip out a scale and measure the flour and the sugar and all of the ingredients, especially when there's not always a precise pound. She kind of like eyeballs and puts everything together, and it's honestly amazing. Neither do I know how to knead. That was a new experience, and I found it so laborious and then amazing to watch her do this seamlessly, something she's been doing for forever, and just how difficult the whole process is. It was important for me to document this, thinking again a lot about oral histories and what gets passed on and what gets carried on, and the fact that when she's no longer with us, even though that's a long time away, nobody will know how to make these things. They will no longer exist. I can tell you for a fact, I'm the only one in my family who has started to figure these things out. So again, thinking a lot about generational divide, things that get carried on, things that move with us and things that don't. I move around a lot. I move yearly. So I'm kind of always in a new place, which is why I've been to so many new supermarkets in so many different areas. If I use Walmart as kind of like a standard, I can instantly know if I go into a Walmart and like they have a Caribbean aisle that's like this big, or they don't have a black hair care section, this Walmart's not for me. It's crossed off my list. Like I'm not coming back. I'll find another one that has hair products and things that I like and is likely closer to a community of people that I'd want to get to know. I've talked so much about food already. Bear with me as I continue on. Another text that was really important for me while I was researching and kind of making this work, it's called Food, Text and Culture in the Anglophone Caribbean by British author Sarah Lawson Welsh. And the reason I'm talking about this text is because she actually came to Barbados for research for the book and conducted a series of interviews with women of older generations to talk about food. And she asked them a series of questions like, what are you cooking now as opposed to what you were cooking 20 years ago? How's your diet changed? How has what you're consuming, producing, making, and all of this stuff? And I was like, literally with my granny, learning how to make these things, thinking about how people, they're not as widely known, like even in Barbados, like these aren't things people are eating every day, and kind of the loss of that tradition and the implications that that's going to have on later generations when we've like lost part of our history because it wasn't passed down or people weren't interested with like the rise of fast food and being busier and eating out more and or not having the time to do it. Yeah, so lots of things just kind of floating around in my brain when I think about this work and making work with my family in general. If you got a chance to see it in person, it's also on my Vimeo. You'll notice at some point in the background, we don't talk a whole lot, but it's literally like a CNN news broadcast that's happening. And I didn't really pick it up until a couple times seeing the work, but essentially there's like a news reporter in the background, like it's maybe like April 2020, and she's like, schools are going to be closed for 2 weeks, and then we're going to do this and this and this, and kind of like the early pandemic. And I've both like had this work with and without the audio, and without that kind of jarring CNN audio in the background, I'm like, wow, something is like lost in translation to this specific period of time. Like I personally find the audio really jarring for such like a nice, intimate, private moment with my granny, like relaying this recipe to me, and the world is in chaos around it. Right, so in a similar piece, this is me with my mom in our kitchen, and this is her first time making something. My granny does live very close by. She literally lives across the street, my mom's mom, but was not coming over to teach her to make something. So my mom gathers everything that she says she needs. She's making saltfish and rice and calls her up and is like, how do I do this? So I'm kind of listening in on the background as she kind of relays the recipe and is like, do this, this, and this. I'm in the kitchen with her, like watching, like recording. And then 10 minutes later, she calls back again with like ingredients she forgot. And she's not a forgetful woman. So we both just kind of laughed, like she's like forgot her secret ingredients. And I just thought that was the best thing ever, thinking of like, oh, like this recipe is going to be good, but it's never going to be as good as mine because I've left out the special touch. And it led me back to part of Sarah Lawson Welsh's text. It talked about missing ingredients. And again, it talks about moving, Caribbean people constantly being in states of flux or migration, things that get lost in translation. But it had a really nice wrap-up point because it said these things can lead to ingenuity. It said these things lead to a really interesting hybridity and new developments, new recipes, new flavors. Just it made everything more complex. And then I was thinking about that in terms of performance and trying things again and again and again. I think failure is actually probably an important part of my practice because I'm constantly learning things that I don't know how to do. And half the time I'm not doing them successfully. So I'm also interested in the art of failure and repeating something and still not getting it, and how those things kind of all accumulate in the work. And that's okay. I think it's important for things not to work out and for a recipe not to go right, and to see where that leads and to keep pushing through. I used to be very disappointed when a recipe would fail, but I'm learning and growing and working past that and discovering new things in the process, or ways of making and ways of doing and ways of performing and adapting. I know that was a whole mouthful. These are some more slides of my mom making dish. This is us testing it at the end. One thing that particularly has interested me about this move and being on the East Coast now are the things I can get back to the supermarket. It was so exciting to me that I could get salted cod in the supermarket. I love salted cod, and that wasn't something I could get locally in Guelph per se. And it made me feel like a strange closeness to people in the area, knowing that there was like a connection between something we both clearly enjoyed because it was in abundance in the supermarket. It again made me feel closer to home or connected. In this one, this is a series. I enjoyed it. I can't say that my mom did. I beg and beg and beg for her to do my hair every time I'm home. She'll sit me down like I'm like 5 again and basically just brush and cornrow my hair for me. It's like my favorite pastime. I think by like the 10th time we did it and recorded it like on separate days, she was probably so fed up with me, but I think it's such a nice gesture. Also to note, this one and the last one, they weren't in the show, but they're kind of all part of like the same body of work, so I really wanted to talk about them and to address them. Again, as a family, we watch a lot of TV. We consume a lot of American media, which is something I'm also thinking about. I think we're watching Snow Dogs here. We're literally watching Snow Dogs with like Cuba Gooding Jr. And I think about how ironic that is and funny, considering my mom's never really experienced a winter. Like she spent her first Christmas here this past year and there wasn't even that much snow in Ontario. I think about how foreign a concept it was and only portrayed to us through a screen, like seeing people even just in that type of clothing or environment, and how that kind of media can then like influence things that we're doing either at home in the country or in the region, just things that sometimes don't make sense, or importing things that don't make sense, like to me, like long sleeve shirts. Why would anybody need long sleeve shirts or like thick anything? You would sweat to death. Where am I? Okay. And then this work is also in the show. This one's called Taking Down. It's a durational performance where I undo my braids on screen. It's quite long and I've done it a couple times. I essentially, these are box braids and I take them out throughout the course of the performance. And yeah, as much as I'm interested in food and how those things intersect with me, I also am interested in Black women as a whole and the various experiences that people have across the diaspora. As Zook has mentioned, I did my degree in history and I've always studied history. So it's been really intriguing to have studied history my entire life in Barbados, then to do like a small chunk of Canadian education and to kind of look at like the things that get told and the things that get left out. So I also think and look at respectability politics and how Black women are viewed on larger scales, both within the Caribbean and in Canada, and kind of like an entire colonial context. That's like a big mouthful right there. But in English-speaking countries or places colonized by the British, a lot of the ways that Black women are viewed, both in the Caribbean and here, are similar. They just kind of play out on different scales. And respectability politics is something that really interests me, like what's right, what's wrong, how one should be perceived, and how those things are linked to your Blackness or influence, and all of those things dating back to like the 1600s and history of enslaved peoples in various regions and how those things still affect us today. I feel like we don't necessarily get to look at how these things that happened so long ago, quote unquote, can still impact us and the ramifications of that, which we often see globally play out and aren't necessarily always aware of. So I think a lot about hair. All of that is to say, I think a lot about hair and its significance and what it means to have it uncovered and undone, and what that still means today to kind of be like, have your aunties be like, that's untidy or unkept or uncouth, or like the varying degrees of like unproperness, if that's even a word, that one's hair can bring, and how that's so much tied to your identity. So washing rice, it's something I have done extensively. I've both performed it live here in this clip, and I've done it as a performance for the camera. I'm going to talk a little bit first about it live, because I think in a perfect world, I probably always intended for it to be a live participatory thing with an audience so that people could come together and we could wash rice simultaneously. In this performance, I actually poured out too much rice, and this took me over an hour. Thankfully, some audience members came and participated and started washing the rice with me. I think of this also as like something that's going away, and we don't do it anymore. In a text I wrote a while back, I talked about how I bought a rice cooker and how that felt so much like a caving in and a loss of identity, because I was using this tool now to cook rice and was forgetting how to cook rice on the stove, or like washing to sift through any like bugs or rocks or anything that could be in it. You can still buy an expensive bag of rice today, and there can still be those few bugs inside of it. I think about it when I don't wash my rice, that there's probably a bug or two in here, and I'm just gonna eat that right now, and that's that. Yeah, I think about how this was something that was maybe like ingrained in like one of my grandma's generations, but not necessarily taught to me. Like my mom doesn't do it. I don't know if she ever did, but my grandparents certainly did, and I try to do it sometimes. But you know, the rice cooker. I think also about the reason why I like this performance live so much is because rice translates across so many cultures and places and peoples that it's like a really nice intersecting point for bringing groups together and to just chat and listen to other people's stories about rice in their cultures from way back when to now, and the things that they like to do with it and the things that they experience carrying rice from one place to another, or the different types of things that they're eating. Yeah, so it's also been a performance for camera where I'm kind of like solo and isolated and washing it on my own to then consume later off camera. Somebody once asked me why I was alone in all of like the solo performances I made here, as opposed to like the more community-based work or like familial work that I make when I'm home. And I think I simply said sense of community. Like I am alone here. I have friends and like a community, but it's not the same as like being within those like familial or like matrilineal structures and ways of being. And it just, to me, it makes complete sense that when I'm home, I would be learning things and performing within my family, and them teaching me things is natural to me, as opposed to when I'm here, I'm definitely exploring things on my own and figuring them out. And like still like with the work with my mom, I'm still kind of, I have those same phone calls. Like I pick up the phone and I'm like, how do I make this? And it's going wrong and the cheese doesn't taste right. And kind of working through all the same emotions. And then I have, this work is also not in the show, but I wanted to talk about it because I thought it was a nice note. It's called How to Open a Can of Corned Beef. This is my friend and Maddie Lychek, who's also an artist. And she teaches me how to open a can of corned beef because I've never been able to do it efficiently or effectively. I kind of always like break the can. So we essentially do this until I get it right. And her mom is Filipino, and we talk a lot about corned beef in both of our various cultures, and it being something that we ate a lot growing up. Maddie was one of the first good friends I made when I moved to Canada, and she took me home one week, and like the first thing her mom made for us was corned beef and rice. And I instantly knew I was like at home and had found a safe place and a family just based on the fact that they had corned beef in their cupboard. So I knew that I would be all right. And here we are, we kind of discuss our various loves of corned beef throughout the video and ways that we cook it or things we do with it. And so if I jump back to these slides, thinking a lot about food, home, culture, states of being. Another person who I think does really great work in this area and has said some really interesting things is Carrie Mae Weems. Like, her work always really sticks out to me in this context. More on that. In an interview with Bell Hooks at one point, Weems said some really interesting things when she was asked a question about home. I think I have it. So Weems said, "Home for me is both mysterious and mythic, the known and the unknown. And the initial focus on family folklore was the beginning of my searching out a home place, trying to figure out for myself the moment in the early 1980s, like where I came from, how this place was constructed, what went on there, what was like the historical movement about, and the movement of my family leaving the South, traveling to the North, migration. And I wanted to know how I fit into that as a woman who was already moving around and traveling. That obviously really resonated with me and my ideas about home and place and all the things that I'm making and doing." I thought I had one more slide. Oh, no, I do not have one more slide. I ran through that. Does anybody have any questions or would like to talk about home or food?
Everyone's muted right now, so if you should be able to control yourself. If not, you can ask questions in the chat. Just make sure that you're saying it to everyone and not just the admin account or someone in the chat. Give people a chance to type it out.
My bad for racing through, guys.
Oh no, we're perfect on time.
Someone direct messaged me about like the green talk about the video work. Oh, someone did direct message me about the green produce being like a form of preservation. But I either need to take a food science class or be in direct contact with the people shipping and handling, because I want to know the time frame of why they need to be so green, because they're so not good. Andrea, can you talk a bit about the video work where the rice is being slowly poured over your head? Yep, that one was not in the slides. I really love seeing the work in the show. I want to speak about it. Yeah, I can talk about that one. So it is, ooh, can I add it in here? I'll just add in what I'm talking about really quickly so people have a frame of reference. Give me 1 second. So essentially the piece Andrea is referring to is a work where rice is kind of like poured on top of my head. There we go. I'll just do it like this. There we go. You can see it. So yeah, this is the work Andrew is referring to. It's again titled Washing Rice. I'm buried under a pile of rice. So when I was heavily like based, when my practice was kind of more based in historical context, and I was doing a lot of research like of colonial periods, post-emancipation, and I was thinking about how rice was even brought to the Caribbean in the first place, and kind of that entire production of it. The work with the cotton is also in the show. I can also talk about that one. The research was daunting and it was a lot, and I felt that I was almost being buried under the weight of it. And I really wanted to convey that in a work. And I thought, like, what a better way for me to convey the way that I'm feeling about doing all of this like heavy colonial research and to be buried under the thing that I'm continuously thinking about. So I sat out with a giant bag of rice until it consumed my head. Initially, I was going to kind of cover my entire body under the rice until I like completely disappeared and was buried in the weight of the history with no way to swim out, until I realized that was not feasible to be under a pile of something. It's just not, would not recommend it. Yeah, and when I get to the end of this piece, I kind of stay under the pile of rice for as long as possible. Like I can't really see, or I could breathe just fine, but it was very uncomfortable and kind of like almost suffocating. And again, throughout the whole process, my brain kind of drifts off when I'm performing, and like I'm always kind of like rattling off like weird facts about history inside my head. But this allowed me kind of just to be still with it all and to think about the implications of trade and tourism and rice historically and what it's done to people. This and the washing, I was thinking a lot about lower grades of rice and like what got fed to people on plantations and why people had to even wash rice in the first place was important for me at the time. Thinking about like people just being fed scraps and lower quality things, and how things were born out of that. When I think back to food and kind of like the frying plantain text, I think about, I'll just use the Caribbean as an example, where people kind of eat like the entirety of an animal or thing, and that dates back to periods of enslavement. It dates back to being given like the lower end or the scraps of meat on a plantation, like corned beef has like cow heel in it, or like eating like pig ears, or like obscure part of animals that people don't necessarily eat or covet today, and how those things were turned into like delicacies and national dishes. And I think back again to this like ingenuity that people have. I hope that answers your question, Andrea. Tyler said, what are some other disconnects in footways that you've recognized in moving around the experiencing different cultures? One that stands out to me in particular is a Eurocentric stigmatization of eating with one's hands. How much more could you respect the food you prepare than to feel it in your hands as you eat it, right? I mean, I like to touch literally everything in the supermarket. So wash your produce, because I've lifted them all up. I don't necessarily know that I entirely eat with my hands, or that's something that people do in Barbados per se, but I do think people are closer to the food that they're making, and in a different way than they're like, I'm much more aware of where food comes from, and like, especially but when I think about fish, or like when you like get a fish in Costco and you can just get those nice fillets, or you can get like a whole fish, and like sometimes like seeing like, I love to observe, so I think about like the aversion sometimes that people can have to like a whole fish, but then like buy the fillet and like be like, I don't know, like grossed out about the eyes or something. I think the supermarket provides a lot of that disconnect between the foods that we eat and where they're coming from, because we don't see it. Like, we don't see the potatoes in the ground, in the dirt, and like we don't recognize those things anymore. Are there any other artists making work about food, around food, that you find compelling right now or would recommend checking out? I will send you a list, and I will probably include like most of the people in Ethics of Frag in the show at the AGO. Ethics of, I'm tongue twisted, can't say the title of the show again. A lot of the works in the show, a lot of those people also make other work, and they do have some interesting work about food. I love a good recipe book, or like a Zoom like cooking class where people are cooking alongside each other and stumbling through a recipe. I would also like to comment, Tara, on the idea of we're all kind of leaning into food right now. I think it was very much like, it was a privilege to be home in 2020 and to not have to be out, and a privilege to be able to afford food and quality produce, and to be able to go about just spending time cooking and to be with loved ones. Like I know that that is an immense privilege in itself, and to be able to find comfort in food. And I do think that a lot of us have done that in these few past years.
Are there any other last questions for Racquel?
Alexandra said, any plans for work with about food in the future? I think I'm always going to be researching food in some context. I think a lot about flour right now, but I've tabled it for the winter. I don't do so well in the winter. I find it really difficult. So when the warmer weather resumes, I'll get back to making work with and about food.
Any last questions before we end tonight's artist talk? Let's wait a few seconds. Oh, here we go.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Thanks, Chloe.
And so I guess that's it for questions tonight. Thank you everyone for attending tonight's artist talk with Racquel Rowe. Racquel's exhibition, Multiple States of Being, is on display right now at Sharks Gallery, closing tomorrow. So if you haven't seen it yet, come check it out. If you've already seen it, come check it out a second time. We'd love to see your faces masked. And I hope everyone has a fantastic evening. Again, thank you so much, Racquel.
Thanks, Lucas.